Hello and welcome to the editorial analysis of the Hindu. Today we shall be discussing the editorial of the 26th of August. So coming to the first article, privacy no longer supreme. The context here is with regards to the right to privacy. This is an important article. This was a very important judgment that the Supreme Court had given, and this becomes something that comes very handy in almost all the analysis. If you are discussing a social issue there, you can use it. So this is a landmark judgment, and this editorial on this is very much relevant for us. So coming to the analysis, the first issue that is important is about the Puttaswamy judgment itself. It was here that the right to privacy was what was declared as a fundamental right. Now approximately 2 years ago, this judgment is what was given by the Supreme Court in Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus the Union of India case. So this is one thing that you should know. Also, this decision was what was taken by a 9-judge constitutional bench. So this again in itself is reflecting how important this judgment is. And this upheld the idea that the right to privacy will be a constitutionally protected fundamental right. So that is about the Puttaswamy judgment. You should definitely know about this particular judgment. Try to quote this judgment, very important. The second issue is with regards to the restrictions itself that have been imposed to the right to privacy. Now in this particular judgment, the Supreme Court in its judgment itself has talked about the restrictions that are there to this right to privacy. Now according to the Supreme Court judgment, it is only that the restriction can be implied by the state, which means the government. Only a government action can ensure that right to privacy is for some time breached or it is aborted for some particular time. But in some cases only the state can go ahead with aborting the right to privacy. For example, firstly this can be done if this has a legislative mandate. So that is the first condition, that for any particular government to take away the right to privacy, it should have a legislative mandate. Secondly, what is important is that it should pursue a legitimate state purpose. If the government is withdrawing the right to privacy, then there should be a purpose for this, a legitimate purpose, not just any purpose on the whims and fancies of the government, but a legitimate purpose. And thirdly, this must be in a limited proportion. That means it should be proportionate depending on the purpose. It shouldn't happen that there is only a riot on the street and the right to privacy is withdrawn. No, that should not happen. Definitely if there is a war, right to privacy can be withdrawn. So it should be proportionate depending upon what is the situation. So these are the three limitations that the judgment itself has ensured towards the right to privacy. So this is amongst the restrictions, and that is also important. Another important analysis is with regards to the structural reforms. Now this is again something that is important. Basically, this kind of a judgment that was given by the Supreme Court brought about some structural reforms in the functioning of the government. And what were these structural reforms were? First and foremost, it advocated that the process of commissioning and executing of surveillance projects by the government are what should be restricted. We all know surveillance is something that the state is often known for doing. Be it any particular state, it is often criticized for surveillance. And now, surveillance will have to be done in a restricted manner. So this is one change that has been brought about. Also, it has built a mechanism of judicial oversight over any surveillance request. If previously the government did not require any judicial oversight, now judicial permissions will be required for this particular process. That is again an important structural reform. Another thing that is important here is the great care and sensitivity that has been shown in dealing with personal information of the citizen. So this is what is the third structural reform which is going to become important now. That sensitivity has to be shown towards the personal data of citizens. So these are some structural reforms, again important. Next, what is important is that this particular judgment in itself had advocated for a data protection law. This law was what was believed to be a transformative law. This law was something that is very important, was supposed to be a rights-oriented law. Right-oriented law means that a law which makes a particular object a right. For example, right to education is a right-oriented law. Manrega is a work-oriented law. It is a right to work-oriented law. And similarly here, the data protection law talks about right to privacy as a right of the citizen. So this is what was envisaged under the data protection law that the government was looking into. So that is the first thing that is important. Also under this particular law, the government was to be accountable. If it is the state that is controlling the data, whosoever is the data controller was then made accountable. Previously, there was no accountability. If thousands of data were lost by the government, no accountability of the person was there. But that is not the case now. It has advocated that there should be some accountability. The actual crux or the gist of this particular idea of this particular judgment, or the principle on which this particular law was to be based, was that the state itself should be a model data controller, and it condoned the idea of essential services being conditional to some data transfers. As of now, what happens? If we have to even go and get a ration card, or for that matter we want to simply get a right to food, even in that case personal information is taken by the government. Huge amount of data is what is taken. This is what has been criticized, that why is the government taking so much of personal information which is not even required for a basic right. So that is one thing that has been talked about, and that is what is important. Another thing that is important that has been talked about is with regards to the technology sector landscape. It changed in India after this particular law, because this law paved the way for innovative privacy methods, also innovative privacy preserving technical solutions are what had to be looked into. These are some technical words which have been used in this particular article. Here it has also been said that the goal suddenly became to establish the country as a global leader in space. So this is the change that has been brought about in the technology sector in the context of the right to privacy. Another important analysis here is with regards to the government action. Now this is again important. Basically, the government, despite this particular law being there since 2 years, the government has not shown much change. Despite the fact that the law itself called for a data protection law, no such law has come as of now. So what the government has continued to do is that it has continued with its mass surveillance programs, and often in the name of national security the government breaches the right to privacy of citizens, and that is what is the first analysis. Some examples for this is what has been given, that the Home Minister recently authorized 10 central agencies to intercept, monitor and decrypt any information generated, transmitted, received or stored in any computer of the country. And also some other kind of programs are what the government is launching. For example, a social media monitoring hub is what the government wanted to establish, which was later condoned by the Supreme Court. So these kind of developments are what are continuing in the country, and which is clearly showing that right to privacy in the country is not being upheld despite the Supreme Court judgment. And that is what the article is all about. It is just criticizing the government for not keeping up with the requirements of right to privacy as a fundamental right. The idea that the government is following, very, very important, is the idea of data monetization. I have discussed a separate video on data monetization. This was in one of the editorials. This is what was a chapter in economic survey this year. Very, very important concept. What the government is doing is that it is treating the data that it has as a public good. For example, if the government has a lot of data regarding the habits of citizens, for example, the patterns of citizens in a particular region, then that data the government is willing to monetize on. The government can sell that data to a private company, gets the money from the private company, and that is how it can use it. It has also said in the economic survey that data is the new oil. For instance, the example that has been given is of the Vahan database, where huge amounts of data about the numbers of the vehicles, that is what has been shared by the government to private companies, and that is a model that is being advocated to other areas also. So this idea, this concept of data monetization is again something that is important. Next, what is important is Justice Shri Krishna committee. Now this is a committee that has been set up to draft a personal data protection bill, and what is being talked in the editorial is that the draft that is being prepared is also not keeping in mind the requirements that should be there for data privacy. So that is what is the entire analysis here. The name of the committee, please remember, Justice Shri Krishna committee. The Puttaswamy judgment is what is very, very important. Definitely right to privacy can be a very important question. This could be an important question in general studies paper 1 as a social issue. Otherwise, the relevance mainly is for general studies paper 2 as a legal matter. So for these two areas, at least you should prepare this particular part well, and also this becomes important for essay papers also. So that is how you have to use this particular article. Coming to the next article on the wrong side. Now the context here is with regards to Jammu and Kashmir, the recent changes that have been brought about in Jammu and Kashmir, and primarily with regards to the restrictions that have been imposed in the state of Jammu and now the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, after the decision that has been taken in the context of Article 370. So in that particular context, this article has been written, but it is an important one. Now what is the issue here is that a newspaper in Kashmir, that is the Kashmir Times, it has filed a petition with the Supreme Court asking that why is the press in Jammu and Kashmir restricted so much? Press has a freedom in our country. Under Article 14, right to equality, all press institutions have a right to equality. Why is it that the press institutions in Jammu and Kashmir are being restricted and nowhere else in the country? Another analysis is with regards to Article 19, which calls for right to freedom of expression. This is where the right to freedom of press is what comes into existence in India, and under this particular issue, the Kashmir Times had filed an appeal in the Supreme Court, which was pending. Meanwhile, the Press Council of India intervened and it condoned the Kashmir Times, and it has stood by the government. It is saying that what the government is doing is right, and the Kashmir Times or any newspaper in Kashmir has no particular press freedom as of now. So the article is largely a criticism of the Press Council of India. So that is the entire issue. Now the idea that is important here is that of national integrity and sovereignty. The government and also the Press Council of India has said that these restrictions are in the interest of national integrity as well as sovereignty. But what you should know, that where on earth or where in which country is an open society with an independent media ever a threat to the national integrity and sovereignty? For instance, when India was under the British rule, at that point of time, it was the Britishers who used to oppress the society and the media like this, because they believed that that is what is a threat to the national security. Now, is this scenario similar or acceptable in the modern times when India is a free country, India is a democratic country? These kind of restrictions definitely are unwelcome, and by a body like the Press Council of India, which is an autonomous body, it should stand by the press at this time of testing, but rather it has chosen to stand by the government. So that is what has happened. About the Press Council of India, what you should know is that this is a statutory body, this is a quasi-judicial body, this is an autonomous body, and it has a mandate to protect and reinforce the professional and objective of media. But despite the fact that it has its autonomy, it has sided with the government, and this is what is appearing as unclear, and this is one issue that is emerging. If you remember, before the elections we had discussed a lot about the Election Commission of India also. This body in itself also had several powers and autonomy, but still it sided with the government. So this is one criticism which is coming in the context of the PCI, so that is important. Another issue which I found important for ethics paper primarily is a comparison between two values. One value is responsibility and the other value is freedom. Definitely the press requires freedom, but is there some responsibility also, is what has been talked about. Definitely we cannot go all blank and say the government is wrong. It is true that in India the media is highly irresponsible. There have been several cases where media has shown extreme degree of irresponsibility, because of which often the secular fabric of the country has been disturbed, and some other disturbances are what have ensured to the country. But the issue is that despite the fact that the media might have acted in a responsible manner, its freedom is what cannot be curbed. That is even more dangerous, is what has been analyzed in the editorial. Definitely there is a responsibility of the media, but these codes of responsibility need to be well established beforehand. They need to be well known, they need to be made public. It cannot happen that at the last minute the government is saying that media has to act in a responsible manner and it takes away its freedom. That should not have happened as it has happened as of now. So that is one important analysis. And another thing is that the role of the media is only to report. The media should never be denied this particular role. If it is going ahead and making an honest reporting of what is happening in Jammu and Kashmir, it would not have been a problem. The problem here is that the government is not even wanting this reporting to take place. And for the media, the problem is that the media doesn't limit itself to reporting. It goes ahead and starts giving judgment, it starts holding discussion and cases, it holds public judgments. So all of that is what happens. So that is what is the entire issue. I personally feel that this issue of responsibility versus freedom can be an important topic in ethics, and otherwise also Jammu and Kashmir itself is one of the most important topics, and this topic particular to press freedom is again what is in news in the context of Jammu and Kashmir, and it becomes important for us. So that's about this particular article. Coming to the next article, currency capers. Now the context here is with regards to the rupee, that is falling as compared to the dollar. It has reached a low of 72 rupees for $1. Now it is not that this is what is a historic low. It continues to fall, and it has in the past also reached much more lows as compared to this. But an alarm is what has been rung in this particular article. These articles are seasonal articles. I always mention that this is only a trend, so you should read it, you should know about the trend, but otherwise not very relevant, because these articles are somehow, it might happen that by the time you're writing your means rupee has appreciated, so things will change, and that is why this is not something that is very replicable, but definitely you should have some particular idea of this. The first issue that is important here is with regards to currency manipulation. Now basically the editorial is discussing that this is what is not only the case in India, it is happening in several other countries. For example, the Turkish lira, in Brazil the real, the currency of Brazil, that is real, South Africa's rand, as well as the Mexican peso. All of these currencies are what are falling, and this is primarily attributed to currency manipulation that is particularly taking place in China because of the trade war. That is what has been criticized also. Another analysis is with regards to the foreign portfolio investors. We have discussed a lot on this. Approximately 20,000 crore of foreign investments from India have left India because of the increase in taxes, that is the capital gains tax. And this was a cause of concern, because of which the government even reversed its decision, but the damage is what has done. Foreign capital has left the country, and this is what has resulted in rupee falling, the cost of the dollar escalating. So that is one reason. Another thing that I found important in the article is the Forex Reserve. This is one figure that you should always know before writing your mains. As of now, this is a historic high of $430 billion. So this is what is again important, that India has a cushion. Even if the foreign capital is what has gone out of the country, it is not much of a cause of concern, because India has a cushion in the form of its Forex Reserve. So that is what is important here. That is the only analysis that I particularly found relevant for this particular article. Nothing much important here, only these trends are what are relevant. So that is what you should have known about. So that's about this particular article. Coming to the next article, a bottom-up approach to conservation. Now the context here is with regards to Kerala floods. Similar floods took place in the year 2018, and now again in the year 2019 floods have repeated. I had discussed an article on this previously, and that article by far is much more important than this particular article. That is much more useful, has a higher utility, higher tendency to replicate in your answers. But from this particular article, I had extracted 2 points. One point is with regards to the WGEEP, which is the Western Ghat Ecology Expert Panel. Now basically, the author of the article, Mr. Madhav Gadgil, was the chairperson of this particular body that was formed, and this panel had given some recommendations which were not followed by the government. So the entire article is very, very specific about this particular body only, and it is saying that what this panel had recommended and why the government should have followed the recommendation. So these kind of specific articles, they don't have much to replicate in UPSC. You cannot write one entire article on the WGEEP. UPSC is not going to ask about it. So that is why the analysis is less relevant, but nevertheless some points we could extract. First and foremost, you should know that there was such kind of a panel that was formed, and this is a panel that had asked for a bottom-up approach to conservation and protection and development. It had given a motto that develop sustainably as well as conserve thoughtfully. So you could replicate these keywords: develop sustainably, conserve thoughtfully. These kind of key phrases sometimes come handy, so that is important. Another thing that I found particularly important in the article is a case study. Now this is the case study of the Plachimara Panchayat. Now this is a panchayat in Kerala, and this had fought a case against Coca-Cola company. At that point of time, Coca-Cola was using groundwater, and according to this particular panchayat, the groundwater was getting toxic. Because of that, there was overutilization of the groundwater, which was impacting the ecology of the region. And despite the fact that the Coca-Cola had permissions from the state government, which Coca-Cola in its defense said that state government is above the panchayat, and that is why Coca-Cola should be allowed to continue its actions. But the Kerala High Court at that time ruled in the favor of the panchayat, and it said that this is the local body and this also has a right over its resources, and therefore in this particular case Coca-Cola had lost and the panchayat had won, and Coca-Cola had to give back compensation to this particular panchayat. So that is one case that I particularly found, which the author is using as an idea of how and what is the power of panchayat. This is a case that you could also use in devolution and decentralization. There are so many times that you get an opportunity to talk about decentralization, and such case studies will come handy. So the Plachimara Panchayat case is one which you could use, and that is what I particularly found relevant. Otherwise, this particular topic of repeated floods in Kerala is extremely important. I have discussed this previously. Please watch my previous discussions where I have discussed about this topic, and in that article we discussed it from several perspectives, from geographical perspectives, from economic perspectives, and that is how the topic becomes important. But as of now, this is the only relevance. The panel, the details in the articles are with regards to declaring some zones as ecologically sensitive zones. The criteria that the panel had recommended is what has been discussed in detail. I don't think it is relevant for you. So that's about this particular article. And that's about our discussion for today. Thank you all for watching the video.